Just before we begin this episode, I'd like to briefly mention a new digital magazine I'm editing called Panel by Panel. You can find it at panelbypanel.com, where there's more info, but it's everything you like about Strip Panel Naked in magazine form, with tons of great analytical writing on comics, and loads of voices from creators to fans to shops to critics. You can pre-order now and it's only $2 for 70 plus pages of content. Anyway, back to our regular episode. So Jeff Lemire's The Underwater Welder has a clear fixation with water. It's fairly obvious even from the name and cover of the book, but you see it all the way throughout the story. The lead character Jack lost his father to the water, lost a link to his past because of water, but it's also the thing that gives him his living as a scuba diver. And on the other hand, the other part of Jack's life is all land-based. He's got a wife and a child that he's about to have with him, this real, physical, tangible life that exists outside of the sea. The way the book chooses to portray that divide visually is really interesting, as while it's a key theme of the book, Lemire is always stringing in this sort of series of clever panels and layouts to constantly reinforce the idea. I'll take a look at a few pages of the book as always to see how he achieves this effect and what the visuals are telling us. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, and I'm Haas, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. There's two key visuals I want to talk about in this episode. The first one is the very clear definition between land and sea, and Lemire really heavily emphasises at numerous times that these are two very separate and very distinct things, but they sit right next to each other, often very divisive. The other visual ties into that, and it relates to how prominently the water is placed in certain frames and with certain characters, and how that links into the view of the world. So let's deal with the first visuals first. We get something on that very first page that starts to explain that divide, where you can see the water lapping up against the edge of the land and this truck sitting there in the middle. It's a very simple visual, really, but there are some key notes there that Lemire adds. The truck is facing the water as though someone was heading in that direction with the truck but has stopped. And as we can see in front of the truck is the sign, a stop sign or a danger sign, something that has given a warning about what's behind it, the ocean. Similarly, we see this sort of weak fence all the way around the edge of the land, stopping people from walking straight into the water. And those two things together create a natural sense of danger. There clearly must be a reason why you can't just wade into the ocean, right? And finally, you've got the storm rolling in from the background on that right side, coming in from the water. The land seems somewhat safe, or at least Lemire is positioning it as a place that wants to keep you safe. And the next page has a character coming out of the truck, walking into the water, and eventually disappearing. By keeping the framings out of the water itself and just looking over it, the idea of the divide is kept cleanly again. Under the water is somewhere else, somewhere we can't look yet, and it creates a mystery to this place that is pretty pivotal in Lemire's story. And like the warning sign on the previous page, there's a message here that the water is going to swallow you up. And we do see it later in the book too, when Jack has come back from sea and he's spending some time with his wife again. There's a panel I love at the top of this page where the winding road they take back to their house splits the panel from the ocean and physically sees the truck getting both higher and away from the sea. You can see the sharp right turn it takes at the end and how the truck will be getting higher above sea level with the road. Once again though, we get a warning sign about this twist in the road, alerting drivers if they aren't careful, the car could come off the road and smash into the ocean. The inherent danger implied was again by the placement of the sign as a facing visual in that composition, but also by the fact that the road almost seems to lead you into the ocean before taking that quick turn away. And at this stage in the story, Jack has got a clear and obvious fixation with the water. He's desperate to go back, and so the divide between land and sea doesn't just come out through the obvious visuals of the actual land and the actual sea, but it starts to divide the characters further in the scenes. For example, in this same page, Jack is again fixated about what happened to his father's pocket watch, which ends up being tied directly to the sea later in the story, while his wife is driving them back to their home, a home which is firmly rooted in the land. This manifests itself as panel breaks between them. The second row we see them in separate panels each time they talk. There's no closeness, but there is a literal break in imagery between them, a white space of the gutter which does speak volumes. And even the row below, which spreads out to a full width panel, doesn't manage to fit Jack in, just a sliver of his shadow. And that's kind of entirely unrealistic. That gap between the two of them is huge in that truck, and I can't imagine a truck that would have the space for two other people in between the driver and passenger. But that visual hits pretty hard, the isolation of it, of his wife, almost like she's driving home alone herself. She, the land, completely separate from Jack, the sea. And that plays into the other visual strategy I want to talk about, how the sea is framed through character interactions. I think it's pretty noticeable during the opening scenes in the diner, where Jack and his wife talk. On the opening to that page, we're given 3 images, which are also quite interesting. A bird not flying, a boat in the water near the dock, a rope tied to the dock cleat. 3 contradictory images that represent a bit of that story. Anyway, in the diner, coincidentally named the Sea Breeze, yet another tie to the water, we see Jack and his wife having a conversation. As a difference from the scene we just looked at, Jack and his wife are constantly placed in the same frame, even if it's just an over-the-shoulder composition. At the bottom row you can see how the back of the heads of each of them invade the panel a little bit more, and that actually they're inhabiting that same space as seen in the final panel. There's a clear and definite link there between the two of them, a more obvious connection between them existing in the same world. But there is something going on, because in both characters' framing is that thing I keep talking about, right? The ocean. Just as Jack is distracted, the ocean is a constant reminder that something else exists in their life and their relationship. And when you turn the page, the divide becomes even bigger. Once they get onto the subject of Jack's father, lost at sea, they become two separate people once again. The ocean sitting right between them, leading into the gutter and then leading back into the new panel. It's placed almost directly between them now, that barrier that separates them. On that 8th panel, you can see almost nothing else matters. Even they don't matter. The focus is the sea and the inevitability of it. And that's the oppression that Lemire builds into almost every single sequence throughout this entire book. The ocean is a warning, a dangerous thing, and it's what keeps Jack and his wife apart. No one has to explicitly say it, but it's there, sitting, waiting, pushing them apart page after page. All the signs tell you to be careful of it. The town itself seems pretty unsure and wary, but Jack can't help the pull. And ultimately that's the fundamental theme of the story. And here you see it, in every page, every sequence, almost every panel. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, I'd love it if you checked out the Patreon and consider supporting. There's tons of extra content, annotated pages and analysis and full-length interviews. For more comics talk and analysis, you can follow me on Twitter at HassanOE, and finally hit subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I will see you next time.